Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Henry Hemming, Managing Director of Food for Media. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar at an extraordinary time in our lives, the coronavirus epidemic. We've pulled together a panel of journalists to discuss the impact on the food and drink sector and also how you, our PR audience, can help them at this time. To give our panelists a chance to give you all a wave, I'm going to introduce them just straight away. We've got Karen Barnes, the editor of Delicious. We've got Jane Hamilton, consumer writer on The Sun. We've got Xanthe Clay, food writer at the Telegraph and other titles. We've got Fiona Beckett, wine writer for The Guardian. And we've got Julia Glotz, one of the leading trade freelance writers. Quite frankly, just between these four walls, this is possibly the best panel we've had for any of these sessions, but please don't go and mention that outside. But it's a terrific lineup. We've been holding these for all of the sites in our camp: Trad Media, Homes for Media, Property for Media, and we've had a great turnout. We, as well as helping you at a professional level, we know that it's just great to have social contact at this time, to see people's faces. I always look forward to these webinars because I just think, great, I'm going to see some people. So it's a lovely thing. I rely on you, our audience, I'm going to say this many times, to pose some great questions. We've decided with the panel that today is going to be very much about taking questions and not too much kind of profile overviews to begin with. So please use Zoom's Q&A functionality on the bottom toolbar. Please start pitching your questions straight away. One small thing, I'm sure we all know who everyone works for, but just in case, Zoom only tells us your name. So at the end of your question, please do also say who you work for. And if you want to put some other stuff in your question about how you're coping, that would be lovely. We did a Homes for Media session yesterday, and we had comments like someone asked a question and said, my favorite thing at the moment is reading glossy interiors magazines in the bath. Hell, if you want to tell us that, because that would be really nice and uplifting. We know that the epidemic has affected everyone at a personal level in one way or another. So it's a great thing just to get together and to have some company with the people that we all work with day to day. So we're going to be covering off how the media is reporting the epidemic. We're going to be looking at the stories and angles that they're working on at the moment. We'll also hear about the kinds of stories that have been shelved. We're going to hear about with future issues, whether they're coming down on the side of people being indoors or outdoors in the way they're writing them. We're going to look at how PRs can help pitch, for example, for digital editions rather than the print publications, and so on and so forth. So do think about how our esteemed panel can help you and start pitching those questions. We were delighted to approve over 150 registrations for the event. We've got brands such as Riverford, Waitrose, Diageo in the audience, which is fantastic, and lots of top name PR companies such as Source, Cow PR. Quick shout out to James Richards. I loved our Paul McCartney chat last night. That was brilliant. We've got mainly PR professionals from across the industry, but one or two stakeholders, company owners as well. So great to have you all with us. I'm also going to give a quick shout out. Sudie Pigott wants to remind everyone that she's running food quizzes, and Lisa Markwell, food editor of the Sunday Times, very sorry she couldn't join us. She was looking to join us, but she'll be here for the next one. On social media, we're #FoodForMediaMeets, and Food for Media's handle is @food4_media on Twitter and Instagram. Very quick word on Food for Media. I wrote to our audience at the beginning of the year to say, I apologize, Food for Media has lagged in the shadow of our other sites in the last couple of years, and that we were determined to turn that around. I've got a new team on the site. We've got Becky Greenwell, who works with journalists. I've got Ash and David. We have seen an amazing change. Last month, we did 249 journalist alerts. So 249 requests from journalists for information, which is an all-time record. Becky's doing an amazing job there. And we had 69 new journalist registrations in a single month. So we're really pleased with the renaissance of Food for Media, and we thank everyone for that. Okay, so I'm going to start asking questions on behalf of our audience. Please post your questions and we will get to them as quickly as possible. I'm just going to give you a slightly more detailed overview of each of the panelists as well, at the risk of causing embarrassment. So Karen Barnes, editor of Delicious. Karen's career in journalism spans 30 years. She's worked in book publishing, women's mags. She headed up the Good Housekeeping Institute before taking the helm at Delicious in April 2010. So happy birthday on that one. The Delicious dot, she will explain whether it's dot or full stop, brand, both online and in print, has an empowering, life-changing message at its heart that everyone can cook and enjoy the creative process of making fantastic food. Beyond this, in her spare time, she teaches food writing. She's a keen musician. You should join us on the next McCartney webinar. A trustee for charities working with communities in Africa, a judge for the Great Taste Awards and the World Cheese Awards, yum. And she's on the board for a food-related enterprise working with prisoners in Pentonville. Xanthe Clay. Xanthe has written her renowned column in the Telegraph for 20 years, so another great anniversary and happy birthday on that one, giving her thoughts on everything from recently the impact of Brexit on restaurants to how Chinese restaurants are reopening. In more normal circumstances, she's writing about everything from mushroom farmers to dairy beef production, alongside recipes and product features. She's also written for publications, including, she says, when she's very lucky, Delicious magazine. She's a former president of the Guild of Food Writers and currently UK chair for the world's 50 best restaurants. Fiona Beckett, also from Bristol, like Xanthe, wine writer for The Guardian and others. So Fiona's an award-winning freelance journalist, writing about food and wine for 30 years. She's a wine columnist for The Guardian and Nat Geo Travel of Food, for whom she was recently shortlisted for the 2020 Fortnum and Mason Drink Writer Award. She's recognized as Rioja's Communicator of the Year. She has her own very well-known website, matchingfoodandwine.com, a unique resource for those who want to know how to match wines with food, as it says on the label. She has written 25 books, most recently How to Drink Without Drinking, a book on the topical subject of alcohol-free drinks. She's also recently collaborated with designer Helen Miller on 4 ebooks, including 101 Great Ways to Enjoy Sherry and 101 Great Ways to Enjoy Chocolate and Wine. I'm very good at that. So lovely to have you on the panel, Fiona. Julia's one of the top industry freelance writers. She has almost 15 years experience on trade publications, 9 years on staff at The Grocer, 5 as managing editor. She curates The Trim, a weekly newsletter that rounds up interesting and unusual food and drink articles, so look out for that one. And she consults on media strategy and runs workshops on everything from writing to storytelling. Last but definitely not least, we have Jane Hamilton, consumer writer at The Sun, with us today. And Jane is probably the only person you'll ever meet who gave up a well-paid job in advertising to join a tabloid paper. But as she says, it has given her both sides of the fence insight into the marketing of ideas. She's worked across online news and features. She was The Sun's consumer editor for 5 years. She set up the title's website. She's in 1999, The Sun website. She now specializes in projects that blend native advertising and commercial opportunities with editorial in areas such as parenting, family issues, properties and careers. So she's got a very wide-ranging insight into The Sun's output, really, really helpful at this time. And the crossover into commercial, I think, is really important to complete the panel. So, so this mother of 3 is with us today. I think that's all I can say. Very good to have you here. I could go on, I won't. Let's get to the questions that we've got today, and we can really get cracking. So I'm gonna say we've got a question from Vicky Rogerson. Is it worth launching new ranges of alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks products at this time? Really, really good question. Should companies be launching, or should they be, you know, keeping things back? She says, I'm struggling to gain traction because we can't send samples as easily. any advice on that one? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I can chip in on that.
Please.
I would say it kind of depends a little bit on the size of your company. I'm still receiving samples. It's kind of useful if they have some purpose in the current situation. So I would say alcohol-free drinks are definitely of interest. I think after 3 or 4 weeks of sort of wild daily drinking, I think everyone's kind of thinking maybe rein back a little, and so I think I mean, I've just written a piece on alcohol-free drinks, which I think comes out this weekend. Yeah, so if it's a small brand, and you can gain enormous traction these days from social media, so I would be inclined to go ahead. Keep going. Maybe a good time to get coverage. Karen, do you have a view on that?
Yes, my issue at the moment actually is that we've actually merged our May and June issues for various reasons, problems with distribution, etc. And so I actually have quite limited space in terms of how much I can write about at the moment. And we are trying to keep deliveries and samples to a minimum, but I would say send everything to Susie Atkins, our drinks editor, because she is very much keeping on top of everything that's coming out. And I think that it's a great, people are very much enjoying their drink at the moment, hopefully not turning to it too much. And I think it's a very important time to know about new things that are coming out, especially in the drinks world, because drink isn't so perishable, so it doesn't have some of the issues that some of the other areas of the food industry have, such as cheese.
Very good. And maybe Jane, any thoughts on launches at this time?
My first thought would be yeah, go ahead and launch, but make sure you can get it into the store so that the consumers can actually buy it. When we've seen problems with big brands being able to actually get the stuff onto the shelves, if you're a smaller company, you're coming forward, do make sure that that supply chain is in place, because the worst thing you can do is set up a demand for your product, then the consumers can't do it. From my point of view, I'm in a similar position. Print-wise, there's a lot less space. All the news is being taken up with coronavirus at the front of the paper. So even if it's a good story, it may not get into print, but I agree with what Fiona was saying. You can build traction online, you can build traction on social media, you can launch a story there, and if your sales go really well, then you've got a ready-made story to go out into print once we're out of lockdown and things go relatively back to normal. It's about being creative. You have to look at your product and say, where does it stand out? How am I going to get cut through? How am I going to get traction? And that's where a really good PR team comes in, because I firmly believe there's a story around every single product, but it's about digging that story out, presenting it in the right way and in the right manner for these times.
Very good. And Julia, the trade position, maybe in the grocer on new launches at the moment, what is happening? Are you getting stuff coming through?
There's still a decent amount of new product information coming through. There is obviously less space available for product related stories, both in print and online. Even journalists who would normally specialize in writing about new product launches are also being roped in to cover more general coronavirus related stories. So it's a decently competitive space at the moment, but there are still opportunities to get coverage around new launches. What I would say is, if you are putting out a release about a new launch at the moment, if you're going ahead and you're launching a new product in the current climate, expect a trade journalist in particular to ask you questions about how the current situation has affected those launch plans. How you're managing to get your products into store, as Jane says, how your sales forecasts and marketing plans have perhaps had to be adapted in light of the crisis. So you can still get that coverage, but people will want to know how your launch has been affected by the wider situation.
Okay, terrific. I'm going to pick another question. I'm going to ask Xanthe on this one. Xanthe, we've got Hayley Reynolds at Raw Food and Drink PR. One of their clients is Food Drink Devon, lovely brand to work for, and they're working on a Devon Speaks Up hashtag campaign. So she says, at this moment, how do we help our members, Devon's producers, retailers, hospitality, communicate what they're doing currently and the future of food and drink in Devon? What would you as a columnist be interested in at this time?
Well, it's so difficult to say, and it's a really fast moving situation. So what I would say to any PR is you have to be very light on your feet and aware that things are changing day to day, even more quickly than that sometimes. Yeah. And that I'm really grateful to hear about things which are just happening now. I do want to know, but I can't always use it. I think in terms of, it sounds like a great campaign. To promote a whole county and to look at the challenges that that county is facing as a whole, because at the moment sometimes stories about one individual who's making jam or biscuits or something feels a little bit too frivolous or too narrow when we're thinking big at the moment. Yeah. So I think it sounds great. And in terms of talking about what the challenges are that they're facing, I think that's really interesting as well, and creative ways that they're approaching their problems. Very good,
Xanthe. Karen, what would you be interested in hearing from the food producers of Devon at the moment?
Well, for as Xanthe was saying, the situation's changing so fast, and I think for the challenges are that things that we have planned personally for Delicious Magazine print, things we planned 3 weeks ago are not right for a magazine that's now going to print tomorrow, Monday. And so we're having to adjust our content very rapidly in a way that we never have before. So I'm really looking for stories with longevity, things that aren't likely to date, and particularly things that have a good heart and message of encouragement and community spirit, because those are the things that people really seem to be looking for. And I think initially everything was all about bad news, and yes, the situation is dire, but we want that to be tempered with things that are really positive and give stories of hope, so that there's something that people can latch onto there. I feel as if tone, as Xanthe said again, is more important than ever, just trying to hit that right tone where you've got some gravitas, but also giving a level of enjoyment without being frivolous, and trying to navigate the way through those three aspects is quite tricky. But so it'd be really helpful for stories to have that focus in mind, where you are trying to give a really strong story with hope, but also that doesn't appear frivolous. And I would say in communicating those stories, it would be really helpful, because a lot of us have furloughed teams, including me. I have half of my team working at the moment, so it's a massive challenge. I would say keep your email, put the subject of your email right there in the subject line, and put the story right there in the first line. I know it sounds mean, but don't waste time saying, how are you? I hope you're well. That can come later, because everybody's saying that, and time is of the essence, and we need to get right to the point.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Great advice. Thank you. So I've got a question now about tea bags, but I think this question could also be about wine. So I'm going to bring in Fiona as well. So it's Louisa Clack at Louisa Clack PR. It's a question about the virtual world, virtual tastings. She's got a fab tea brand, I think Small and Wild. They're wondering about whether virtual tastings work. I'm guessing that the tea bags go out to you and you all log on at the same time and have a virtual tasting. Do you think media outlets would be up for virtual PR events at this time? So I'll be interested in your views on that from a tea perspective, and maybe Fiona, you could start with a wine perspective.
Yes, I mean, I've actually been bombarded with invitations to Zoom wine tastings. I mean, I think people have to remember that we're not just kind of like hanging loose. We are kind of trying to work and you know, create output. And so there is a limited amount of time to actually go to tastings. I mean, actual in real life tastings have dried up. So, you know, to some extent it is welcome. I mean, I've signed on for one next week, but actually it's the first one I've agreed to do. I kind of would like to say yes, but I'm not sure how many people actually have time to kind of log on and spend, you know, an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, doing a tasting with a brand.
So it's got to be a special vintage or from somewhere quite new.
It's got to be something, you know, really where you sense that there might be an article in this, you know, that actually you could build from that into an article. Can I just actually quickly also come back on the Devon question, because I think it is kind of a question of ingenuity, and it's not, I think it's Dorset rather than Devon, but there's a really charming initiative from a winery who have teamed up with an asparagus producer and are sending out their wine with a bunch of asparagus. If you kind of, you know, I mean, this is a consumer offer, but that's kind of nice. It's cute. It links products, and you know, I think that's really smart. That kind of thing, that kind of ingenuity, is what's needed at the moment.
Okay, tea bags, maybe Xanthe or Karen.
I haven't been invited to any virtual tastings. I think it's an interesting idea. I think that time is key, and I think what Fiona said about sitting down for 45 minutes to an hour, no, absolutely not. But you might, if it was a, you know, 10 to 15 minutes, say, and you felt there was going to be a story. And in some ways, you know, to keep that communication going, there's value in that as well.
I do have a thought on that I think the people who are left working when there are teams who've been furloughed, the people who are left working don't really have time to do the tastings, but if you make use of social media to advertise tastings, that's a good way of attracting the people who might be on furlough and who actually do have some time to check in and find out about some new products, because you know, there are two camps going on here, and those people won't be reading their emails. So that's just one tip.
Okay.
And just to briefly come in on that, I mean, sadly, neither wine nor tea tastings are a regular part of my work. The one area in the trade sphere where I think tastings and sort of virtual replacements for those could come in is around Christmas and July, and those Christmas preview shows that are actually really important focal point for trade coverage as well. And obviously there's very little visibility at the moment as to what's going to happen with those events. So I could see scope for tastings or product samplings where there's perhaps access to buyers the way you would have them on an in-person Christmas in July event as well. But yeah, possibly not on a day-to-day basis, but I think for those Christmas ranges, because they're so important for the trade titles as well, I could see there being appetite for that.
Very good. Well, we covered Devon, and then it spread into Dorset, and my goodness me, Cornwall have got in on the act now. So Chris Penfold of Barefoot Media, Cornish agency, says they've created a directory of hundreds of Cornish food and drink businesses that are tweaking their offering to provide home deliveries at the current time. Are you interested in how local you know, food delivery companies are changing? Are there good stories there? Is it human interest? You know, how would anyone approach that? Anyone want to shout to answer?
I think it depends a bit how the delivery is working, because if it's delivery within Cornwall, that's fantastic, but that would only work as part of a larger piece where I was talking about delivery all over the country, where local deliveries were happening. If it's national delivery, then that has more relevance to a national title as a standalone topic.
Fantastic.
From my point of view, on a national title, I would be really keen to hear on the human interest side of things. So, for example, if it's a Cornish producer, they're doing local deliveries, but as part of their local deliveries, they've taken on that they're going to check in on vulnerable people, or maybe do a little shop for somebody else who can't manage it. It's not directly related to food per se, but it is the kind of thing, if you're being creative on PR, that you'll get yourself into the national paper, pictured, holding up your product outside a vulnerable person's front door. So, and it's also going back to what I think you said, Fiona, about having stories around kindness and community and how important that is at the moment. That is what people are wanting to read, because from our point of view on a national title, there's so much negativity and so much frightening stuff. Food is comfort. food is well-being. If we can connect that up and find a community story and a human interest story, then that's very, very likely to fly straight into the paper. People need to hear good news.
Can I go in on that just quickly and say I completely agree, but it does need to be a really genuine story.
Yes.
I've been inundated by PR's stories telling me how, you know, some pizza company is giving away 10 pizzas a day to the NHS or something, and it's so blatantly trying to get themselves column inches based on what's actually a pretty small contribution. It doesn't feel genuine. It just,
yeah.
So it does need to be a really something real,
yeah,
and connected.
So far as drink is concerned, I think independents and small producers have got a real advantage in that supermarkets at the moment are very sort of locked into providing the necessities, and so they actually have been shrinking their ranges particularly in terms of wine and other drinks, and there's less, you know, it's hard to get an online slot, and actually I know that a lot of independent wine merchants are doing quite well because they're reacting very quickly, they're delivering stuff to people, producers are being imaginative. So I think the indies can be quite quick off the mark. They can, and given that the situation is changing, as we've already commented, you know, they can be nimble and they can change their business model very fast. And actually, so they have got something going for them there. And, you know, that can also be of interest, I think.
Yeah. So picking up on that and Xanthe's point about companies just saying everything they're doing, even if some of it perhaps isn't newsworthy, even though well intended. I've got a really honest and open question here from Poppy at Lindor's Abbey Distillery. They are, you know, rather like Brewdog, and Brewdog got a lot of coverage. Lindor's are creating sanitizers and donating it to local community. She says, we're worried about appearing mercenary in mentioning this in PR. Should we mention it at all? Yes or no? What do our panelists think?
Definitely, I would have said.
I agree. I think it should be mentioned. And I think a lot of people are doing the sanitizer thing, and it's good. We've mentioned as many as we can in our current issue, and I think that is genuinely a good thing to be doing. It's resourceful and it's providing something that people need.
But just as an example of a story becoming old, I think distilleries producing sanitizer was news 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's not really news now. I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of like there's quite a lot of people doing that, and it's really worthwhile, and it undoubtedly helps their local community, but it's no longer enough to pay coverage on, I think.
Yeah, I think you would get it as news at a local level, perhaps even on the TV or radio locally. But I think if you keep pushing it out at a national level, you risk the brand looking a bit Me Too, like following on what everybody else has done. I think you do have to go and get national coverage. You have to be a first mover in something at the moment.
I agree. It might be part of a bigger picture story, even if it's not a story on its own.
Very good. Similar one from Lishai Kaufer at Publish Lab. She says, I've just launched a new online supermarket dedicated to small independent food and drink startups and SMEs, which has got a great backstory. The media like it. Says, I can't help but feel conscious about overtly promoting British at a time when we should arguably be supporting all food brands regardless of where they're from. I'm not sure about that. What does our panel think?
I'll jump in on that. So I think it's I think it's a really good question. I think there are ways you can positively talk about British, particularly to the trade media and what British brands are doing, without talking down other brands. I think I'd be very cautious about anything that tries to be negative about non-British competitors. I think this isn't the time to start making people feel even more anxious about their food choices than they potentially already do. So I think you can talk about your own provenance in sort of proactive and positive terms, but I'd be very cautious about anything that suggests that non-British goods might be inferior.
Very, very well put. Any other thoughts from our panel?
For me, it wouldn't be a case about dismissing somebody else as inferior. It's about, if you want to buy British, I think that's absolutely acceptable. As you say, we know the provenance, we know it's more likely to be able to get to us, whatever happens in the future. And also it's about supporting jobs in your local community. If you live in Dorset, you're going to buy products from Dorset, you want to keep your next door neighbour in a job. I have no problem with that at all. I think it's a really good idea.
Okay, that's very good. I've got two quite linked questions here, so I'm going to join them together. They're probably mainly for our staff journalists. Louisa Clack again, how has your day in the life changed? How have lead time changed? How have your daily editorial meetings changed? And I've got a similar one, which is, bear with me, Emily Churchill, PR at Rude Health. Are you getting more or less contact from PRs? How are you sifting through what you receive? What are you on the lookout for? So just, I guess it boils down to, what are the changing structures of editorial decision making at this time? And maybe Jane and Karen could answer that one, and then we'll move on.
For me, all of our deadlines have been very much pulled forward, so we have to get everything in a lot more quickly. We're used to that on a daily paper anyway, but it's really accelerated. In terms of contact from PRs, I mean, on a normal day, a normal news day, I'd probably get anything up to 800 press releases a day, which is nigh on impossible to look through. So whoever said put the title at the top and dispense with the niceties was absolutely right. I'm actually getting fewer releases at the moment because I think people are very aware that there's less space in the paper, but the quality isn't perhaps as high as it would normally be when I get more, which sounds counterintuitive. I think there are a lot of PRs who are quite nervous about how to go forward, how to address things, the tone that they should be putting out. So even though I'm getting less, it's not quite as good.
And Karen?
Well, for us, I mean, the question also touched on how a day in the life and how things have changed. Obviously, working remotely is so different, and that lack of being able to, I mean, looking someone in the eye on a screen is different from looking someone in the eye across a desk, and being able to just turn and chat about things. And that the communication for us has been key, constantly talking and making sure that we're updating each other on things. Likewise, my press release pile has gone down, and I think people are. I've noticed that PRs are being very careful about doing things in different ways and not just sending out any old thing, which is much appreciated, because, as I mentioned before, time is at a premium. But for us as a brand, Delicious, the online and social it's really brought our teams together in a way that we haven't ever done as much of before, that everything we're thinking online and social first and magazine print very much second, because the lead times are such that it makes it very tricky with the story changing so fast, as we touched on before. And so we are doing quite a lot of stories online about great things that are happening right now that people can log into, that things that will be irrelevant in a week's time. And so I would say that's been very different for me, because I am constantly thinking with every single story, how does this work for online? How can I use it in both ways so that I'm using the time to the max? I'm getting a short and nuggety story for online, and I'm also getting a longer story for print that has longevity.
Very good. Possibly a question for our freelancers. Good question from Bethan at Waitrose, who says, as a result of the epidemic, are there ways of working with PRs that you've started using that you like and you might keep using when the pandemic is over? I think we might be zooming here. Or indeed, has anything stopped that you're absolutely delighted has stopped? So how has it changed your life? Maybe Xanthe to start.
Well, like Jane and Karen were saying, there do seem to be fewer press releases. And I think in some ways, just as maybe the guys in PR aren't really sure what we're doing we're not that sure what you're doing either. We're not sure who's still working, who's furloughed, who's, and I would almost, particularly actually from, you know, the big multiples like Waitrose, I would appreciate a kind of just an email saying, we're here, we're working from home, but we can still answer your questions, that sort of thing. I'm writing a piece actually today, which does involve some supermarket, and I've sent out a couple of emails, but I haven't had any responses yet because I'm just not really sure who's working, what's going on.
That is a really good idea. I think from big agencies, just a quick rundown of who is working and who's the best person to contact for stories would be really useful. Great thinking.
Very, very good. Anything else that anyone else likes? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for effectiveness, people contacting you via social media is probably quite a good way to, I mean, not everybody will welcome this, but I don't mind it if somebody I followed DMs me on Twitter, or they send me a message on Instagram. I mean, it's like, it won't always be picked up. And sometimes I might sigh, but actually I'm more likely to pick up something, particularly if it's targeted, if it's sort of like, they know what I'm interested in, they know what I write about. So like if we take the alcohol-free subject, you know, they might know that I've written a book, they might know I'm interested in the subject, they might have a new product, and they might just send over a quick message saying, look, we've got this new thing, would you like to take a look at it? So actually it's quicker than picking up emails, plowing through emails.
Okay. While I have you there, Fiona, Dimitra Paputsakis from Sauron says, what stories would Fiona like to see and hear more of from wine companies at the moment, e.g. product launches, human interest stories, financial information? And I've got another one for you if I can find it, from Anonymous. Which wine merchants and brands are currently getting cut through in the current climate? Could you handle those two?
Oh, wow. Let's kind of take the second one. I mean, I think the ones who are getting cut through are ones who are, you know, agile, as I've said, and quick on their feet. I mean, I'll kind of, the risk of it being slightly invidious, I'll pick out two because actually they do it really well. One is a very small kind of wine bar and wine merchant in Padstow called Bin 2, which is kind of like just always popping up cheerily on social media. I mean, they just are very, very good at it. You know, it's the main man kind of connecting with people, you know, so, you know, like I'm always interested in what he's got to say.
Yeah.
And there's another company in Shrewsbury called Paso Primero, which are kind of a young couple who actually make wine in Spain and kind of had the brilliant idea of kind of, you know, making wine and importing it, and have had a nightmare of a year, affected first by the floods in the region in Shrewsbury, and now COVID. But just keep on telling the world what they're doing in, you know, really, really efficient use of social media.
Yeah.
I've actually, because, you know, I want to help people like that, created a platform on the website which is called 5 Reasons. And any brand can actually get in touch, and it's kind of, it's almost like a kind of, it's a free slot. It's an open mic platform for anyone who wants to just give people 5 reasons why they, you know, the public should buy from them. And so, you know, we can do our bit to help too. You know, be nimble is the answer.
Very good. So Fiona, our audience, Fiona's very open to social pitches, and personality led is a good thing, seems to work. That's great. So I've got a couple on recipes. I'm going to try and join them together. One is from Alex Scripps at Nudge PR. One is from Priya Kula. Alex says, speaking of old news, is there consumer appetite for store cupboard recipes? So I'm assuming that's kind of emergency ration. Is that what it means? What do we need to land this coverage? Does having top chef associations help there, or should there be an awareness day or something else? So I hope the panel gets that idea of store cupboard recipes. And Priya says, what's the best way to write and format press releases for easy readability when it comes to food recipes? Who would like to handle those recipe questions?
Shall I talk about recipes?
Please.
For us, it's a slightly tricky one, this, because we don't ever use a recipe unless it's been tested. And we also would always want to shoot it ourselves. So this is difficult because we can't shoot anything at the moment for obvious reasons, and testing also has its challenges. Also, time is an absolute premium because we're bare bones team at the moment. So recipes are actually tricky. They are what we do all the time, and I would say that there's never been a more important time to have great recipes in the magazine, but we are mainly having to create our own and use things that we already have created and use them in clever ways. Chef recipes are, I have to be frank, notoriously difficult because they often don't work, and they need a lot of work to get right, because it's a sort of different skill getting a recipe down on paper in a way that genuinely works for the home cook. So at the moment, I say I'm shying away from them unless there is something that is really obviously down to earth and straightforward and good. As for store cupboard, I think terming it store cupboard feels a bit over already, but there are so many different ways to present down to earth cooking. So it's just a way of presenting recipes in a way that seem accessible and doable. But at the same time, the feedback that we're getting from quite a lot of our readers and online users is they're actually, if they have more time on their hands, which some people do, they're relishing a bit of a challenge in the kitchen and actually enjoying spending a bit more time doing something that they would never have time for ordinarily. I really think the world is falling into two camps of people who are desperately trying to fill up their time and people who feel as if they haven't got any time because they're working at home and they've got children running around and they actually can't fit everything in. So our challenge is trying to find something that appeals to both of those camps.
Very good. And I'm going to bring in Xanthe, and Kat Reynolds of Echo PR says, you know, are chef recipes good right now? How do you feel about this, Xanthe?
I think it's an interesting one. I think it depends a lot on the chef. I was just thinking actually before we started this webinar that there's been surprisingly little input in terms of sort of big name chefs. I mean, I haven't seen, you know, any releases involving Tom Kerridge or people like that. And I would have perhaps expected to see a bit more input from those bigger names. I think chef recipes, unless they're a big name, is of limited use. And it's very difficult to push a brand right now in that sort of way, I think. I'm not likely to be able to use a recipe that's specifically using a certain brand of tin tomato or something. That just makes sense to me.
Agreed.
So.
Very good. I think one for Julia, please. Ellie Sleep, I don't have Ellie Sleep's company, but on the back of the discussion around hand sanitizer and old news, are initiatives to support, charitable initiatives to support the hospitality industry of interest at this time, from a trade perspective, maybe especially?
Yeah, I think to an extent, yes. I think Fiona put it quite well earlier that a lot of these initiatives, even if they're very worthwhile, aren't necessarily newsworthy anymore. So I think it's about coming up with creative angles and really telling an exciting story around those initiatives rather than hoping for straightforward news coverage of the fact that you are doing something. But there is a lot of interest among trade readers in sort of good deeds coverage. People do want to know what different parts of the industry are doing to support their own employees and the wider community. So there's an appetite for that, but maybe look beyond straightforward news coverage and share insights around what you've tried and lessons you've learned, and try and be useful to your industry peers rather than just getting coverage of the wonderful things that you're doing.
That's very helpful indeed. Okay. We've got another kind of virtual one. Daniel Humphrey of Somerton Whisky Club. We've chosen to adapt our whisky festival to create a virtual whisky festival instead, as so many brands have got to do it this time, which has taken us from a regional audience to a national one. Very good, you should be in PR, Daniel. and he says, we're only small, we've never talked nationally before. Where would you focus your efforts, he cheekily asks, if you were promoting this for the first time, a kind of online virtual whiskey festival? Any thoughts on that?
I'll say, why doesn't he send this press release to me and I'll see what I can do.
Yay. So Dan, that's good advice. Send a press release in a box to any members of our panel.
I think I quite like the idea of online festivals. Actually, I think that they may take off, you know, over the summer with real festivals not happening, you know, people are really into virtual pub quizzes at the moment. So I kind of think they want a bit of collaborative fun, and so a whiskey festival sounds actually like quite a lot of fun.
Mm.
Very good. Clements from Clementine, Clements to Crazy, is Father's Day still a focus for anyone on our panel? Or has that been and gone in terms of lead times?
It hasn't been and gone for me. I'm not sure if what we'll be doing. The newspapers, I think it's still there.
Oh no, we'll definitely be doing something, but it's too far out. I think it's June, isn't it? And we're not even in May yet, so please don't make me think that far out. What am I going to do for tomorrow?
As for me, I have just written about Father's Day because we go to press on our May June issue tomorrow, Monday. So that's it for me. But for print, but for online, we'll definitely be doing a roundup of great gifts, but that won't be until the second week of June, third week of June, when it's Father's Day.
Okay, another one from Clementine. This is Josh. Do you think the media landscape has changed irrevocably as a result of coronavirus? Or do you think business will go back to usual in the fullness of time?
If anyone knows the answer to this question, I would love to know it, because I have no idea. I feel as if I can't imagine ever getting on a train and going and sitting in an office again. I don't know if anyone else feels like that, but it's just such a strange place. I feel we're almost caught in time. I think everybody feels that way. And I have absolutely no doubt that the world is going to be a different place in terms of anyone who works in an office. I can't imagine. I think there will be far fewer people working in offices after this. Who knows whether I'll be one of them? Yes, who knows?
Anyone else? And food distribution and retailing and consumption, will that change, or does everyone think, no, we will eventually get back to how we were?
I mean, again, to kind of echo what Karen just said, who knows at this stage? I think there's so much uncertainty at the moment about how long the lockdown is going to last, what the world is going to look like after that, what the economy is going to look like after that. So it's a good question to ask, but I'm not sure. I certainly don't have an answer to that, and I'm not sure I've seen any particularly compelling answers to that at this stage either.
I'm going to jump in here. But for me, the most interesting thing about this pandemic, particularly how it relates to food, is that everybody has had to become more like a sun reader. Everybody's on tight budgets, everybody's income has dropped, everybody's stretching the pennies. They're all trying to learn to use every last piece of food. And that's what sun readers tend to do. But the average household income, not sold income, household income for a sun reader is £27,000, and that's to feed your family on. If you're a part-time worker, their average on the Sun is 14,000. So they know how to do these store cupboard recipes and to get through, and how to be creative on the cooking with what you have in the house and stretching those pennies right to the end of the week. I think what we are going to see going forward is that people will have got used to living on a little bit less, and perhaps even enjoyed it in terms of being creative and coming up with new recipes. I'm sure once lockdown ends, there'll be a big rush to go and do the luxury stuff and to have the restaurants and eat well and spend well. But there will be an increasing realisation, as we've talked about the economy, nobody knows what the future holds. People will be worried about wages and their own income stability. Everybody has learned during this time to make do with less and how enjoyable it can be. I think that may well continue in the future.
Very good. And I'm going to bring in our other panelists and add another question at the same time, but just to keep this topic going, because it's really interesting. Emma Hartland Mahon says, post-COVID, and assuming a return to normal, a vaccine, etc., what food and beverage concepts do you see taking off? What will be the big, you know, PRable new F&B ideas post-COVID? What will be the new farm to table, fish to tail? Maybe Xanthe could start us there. Any predictions?
I certainly think community is going to continue to be a big theme in terms of working together, and possibly even suppliers and producers working together to support each other. I think, or I certainly hope that that's going to continue. I think we touched upon, Jane mentioned restaurants, and that's a particularly scary area because it looks as though restaurants are going to be the last places to be allowed to reopen. And when they do reopen, it's going to be in a very different shape with tables further apart, fewer people, fewer covers. So I think there may be a return to something more like normality for food producers and for suppliers and those brands, but for restaurants, it's anyone's guess.
And Fiona?
I think certainly at the moment, you know, conspicuous consumption and sort of the luxury kind of lifestyle coverage that we've seen over the last few years just seems inappropriate. I mean, there will be people who buy into that, and I think there are people who are using this period to experiment a little with different food, different drinks, because they've got the time and some of them the disposable income, but I don't think that's true of the majority. I think in PR terms, that just means, you know, being empathetic rather than on message. You know, you can't, I mean, it's really important, I think, to just kind of take a feel from the people you know, the people you hang out with, your family, rather than just take a steer from the client. You know, the client may want to carry on putting out a particular message, but, you know, I think it's PR's job to act as a corrective to that and, you know, be aware of what's going on and feed that back to the client so that they don't appear tone deaf.
Very good. Similar, I mean, a good point from Fern at Source Communications, who says, you know, basically it's pretty hard at the moment saying that a food brand is doing well. She says that they've got clients that are doing recipe box delivery services and a CBD brand who are seeing surges in demand, but it's hard to, you know, communicate that these are doing well because they don't want to be seen to be in any way profiteering. Any kind of thoughts on that?
It's just entirely about how you couch it and the language that you use. You don't have to say that you're doing well. You can say you're supporting the local community and this has happened and sales has gone up as a result. You don't have to put it in monetary terms at all. It's just literally how you present it. We want companies to be doing well. We want brands to still be out there and doing well, and people to have jobs, and in some cases to even be creating employment. It is important to know that the whole world is not collapsing around us, and there are people out there who are making a success of things. I want to hear those stories.
It's a good news story if the CBD blend is helping people, if people are finding it helpful. That's a great good news story, I think.
Yeah, and again, to just build on that, I'm hearing a lot of brands like that who are quite worried about coming across as a bit tone deaf or like they're sort of promoting themselves when lots of their peers in the industry are suffering, perhaps. So I think it's about getting the tone right, and it's, you know, looking beyond just that straightforward story of we are doing well, and perhaps sharing what you are specifically doing in your business that's allowing you to thrive under these circumstances.
Very good. James Richards of Cow PR, who I have maybe have mentioned earlier in a Paul McCartney contest. I work for an agency in which experiential stunts are at the heart of what we do. COVID has meant we are changing tact. We're looking at smaller press office activations. With this in mind, when it comes to alcohol brand, what types of stories are likely to land with your respective publications at this time? Maybe Karen could start us there.
That's a difficult one for me to answer. I'm never really very keen on gimmicky stories around alcohol brands personally. What I'm interested in is, does it taste good, and is it good value for money, and whether it's, you know, is it something that people will want to embrace and try in their homes. And at the moment, value is more important than ever before. I suppose so what's going to bring it to my attention is the things that we've already touched on, stories behind that brand, what it's doing for the community, how what's their ethics are of production. That's always important to us as a brand. That's all I can say, really. I think it's not a time for gimmicky stories.
Yeah. So communicate the ethics of production, and maybe Fiona, you would say it's good if there's a person behind a
yeah, I must say I'm kind of like, when you know, just like listening to this and thinking stunts and thinking, actually, really not at the moment. No. I kind of, and also, but actually, I don't think The Guardian is probably the audience for those kind of stories anyway.
To be fair, I think he was saying they've moved out of stunts to press office.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, I mean, make it interesting, make it personal, and make it genuine and authentic, not cynical, not the kind of story that Xanthe was kind of like, we're providing you know, free pizzas to the NHS type of story. It needs, you know, it just needs, it needs thought. I mean, I think PR needs more thought than ever before. It just needs, shouldn't be formulaic. It should be intuitive.
I think we're living in a world at the moment where almost no one is unaffected by this in some way, and in either, well, emotionally, financially, in every way, family, whether you've been touched by illness yourself or have lost somebody close to you. And it's making everybody reassess life. People have got more time to reassess life and the things that are important in life. And that's what needs to underpin everything that we do at the moment, even more so than it ever was before. So I would say, if you're writing any kind of stories or trying to come up with an angle, just step away from it, sit in a chair and read it as if you were the person on the receiving end and think, would that actually appeal to me? Would that spark my interest? Would that make me cross? Would it make me think it was smug? I mean, smug is the thing we want to avoid at all costs. And I would say it's what I call the armchair read, and I do it of the magazine. My team laugh at me with regard to the armchair read, but I always say, just take a step back sometimes, read it again, and imagine you're not you. You imagine you're the reader sitting in their chair and reading it and thinking how they'll react to it. Is it accessible? Is it down to earth? Does it come across as warm and embracing and empowering rather than smug?
And very good. And Karen, well, I've got you there. I've got Louise Barnett, freelancer. We're hearing the supermarkets are planning to rationalise their Christmas offering. Do you think this will have a knock-on effect in the content in magazines and other media? I'm not quite sure what rationalise the offering means.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that that's partly to do with, and they will have already done all of their planning and for their Christmas products. So if that means cutting lines that they already had planned, that's going to be a huge amount of wasted work. I imagine that it's partly to do with this balance between luxury and, you know, we've been talking a lot about budget and value for money. And I think it's going to be a sense this year that Christmas is always a time when people want to try and create something special and maybe spend a bit more if they can. But the reality is we are going to be in a position where people have less money to spend, and radically less. And that is going to have to be borne in mind. I haven't started thinking about Christmas 2020 yet. I'm saving that for a few weeks' time and hoping that the world will have moved on a bit when we do that. But I think it's going to be different. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Okay, great. One for maybe Julia and Xanthe. Interesting one. Emma at Various Strategies says, we work with food manufacturers on climate issues, climate action, climate control. Do you see that becoming more of a long-term theme with your readers? So with your readers, Xanthe, in the Telegraph, and with the stories that you're pitching into trade media, is climate-friendly food going to be increasingly important in column inches?
Yes, I think we're looking quite far ahead. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's worried a bit about the way that our use of single-use plastic, for instance, has been vastly increased during this outbreak, and that a lot of the climate concerns seem to have been shelved. But I think it won't be long before there's a kind of backlash, if that's probably not the right word to use, but and that we start to address that again. And yes, it's a huge theme. It's not going away. Yes.
Very good.
Yeah, and I'd absolutely echo those points. It certainly feels like it's sort of a bit on the back burner at the moment, and it's been overshadowed by what's happening with coronavirus. But I think there are lots of people in the industry who are actually quite concerned about that, and they want to make sure that some of those sustainability initiatives retain their momentum. So the moment for those stories might not be right this second when you're pitching it, but it's a long-term theme and it's not going away.
Very, very good indeed. Okay, we're slightly running out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up with just a few comments from the audience. First of all, I've got Louisa Lee at Whitelink who says, should I be feeling guilty that my lunch is a hash brown and mozzarella wrap when I'm on a webinar of this nature? Great session, you guys. She's really enjoyed it. Sanjay Agarawal says, we're a family spice company, secured lots of press over the years. Would the panel all like to receive some of our free spices? Quite possibly, I would give it a go. I've got a message from, oh gosh, I've got a message from Dan to Jane. Dan, this is, Jane, sorry, this is about the whiskey, the online whiskey club gathering. There's something in the post to you, okay?
Oh, don't send it to my office because we're all working from home.
Better get in contact with us at Food for Media. Sorry to anyone where I haven't had the time to ask your questions to the panel, but I will say that the questions today have been absolutely brilliant, and I think this panel was our very, very best. So thank you to them for giving up our time. A virtual round of applause, I'm sure, for Karen Barnes at Delicious, Jane Hamilton at The Sun, Fiona Beckett at The Guardian, Julia Glotz, freelance writer, and Xanthe Clay, The Telegraph, freelance writer. You've been a wonderful panel. It's been lovely doing this with you. So thank you all very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great fun. I hope we do it again.
Yeah, that would be good.
Give everyone a wave goodbye anyway.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time, everyone.
Bye.